Authentic Simulation and Revolution Race Cars have foolishly invited me to Silverstone in order to check out their race cars in their garage, but also to check out the new Authentic Simulation Assetto Corsa mod of this vehicle. So come along with us on this video and let's see what this mod's like, and let's see the future of sports prototypes potentially. Don't forget to subscribe so you can unsubscribe at a later date, and if you want to get the car in this video, head over to simvendor.com or use our affiliate link in the description. Really appreciate the support. Warning, this is a nerdy video, and before we drive the mod car and give our first impressions, we're first going to talk to Daniel from Authentic Simulation about the process involved of taking the real world car and turning it digital. Hi guys, I'm here in the Revolution garage at Silverstone with Daniel from Authentic Simulation, and you're going to talk us through the challenges of getting this vehicle in its real form into the simulator. So when you're actually building the mod, what are the first things that you're starting with?
So for me personally, I kind of work almost there and back. So I start with like the tires almost originally, then we're gonna often go to the basic suspension layout. In this case, we had the CAD files from the manufacturer, so we're able to model all of that exactly. We know the exact measurements of every rod, and it's double wishbone front and rear. It has a pretty advanced damper system, and then it even has a third element, both front and rear, for third element springs for when you're in higher speeds, higher downforce, and you can control the gap and things like that. And so you kind of just start by getting the initial layout in, and you're not too worried about, for me, I'm not too worried about if the spring's exactly right yet. I'm just putting in the data that we have, and I keep moving through. Then maybe the engine is next, and then maybe the aero, and then you get the aero done. Aero can be a bit more simple in Assetto Corsa, so that's often one of the last things I do, and it's kind of the middle point for the physics, because then I start working my way back again, and now I'm starting to work on, okay, now we're back on the engine. Is everything exactly right? Do I have, for like the fuel, for example, you can define specific burn characteristics of the type of fuel they use. With extended physics, you can add those exact characteristics, the weight of the fuel, for example, per liter, and you start adding all those details, making sure the transmission is exactly right. Maybe at this point you start giving it to some test drivers with Revolution, and they start giving feedback. Okay, yeah, this is maybe what's on the spec sheet, but now as it's beginning to form together, this is our actual feedback. And then finally, you kind of end back at the tires. At that point, then you start to look, okay, now the car's kind of finished, but obviously there's a couple of custom features with this car that aren't included in either Assetto Corsa or custom shaders patch. So that's kind of a unique challenge, and that's the next step, is bringing those features into
So what would you say is, with this car and with AC, what's the hardest thing to implement? What's the trickiest component to implement?
I would say so I start with the tires and I end with the tires, because at the end of the day, the tires are the most important part of any race car. And it's also challenging often because you don't have a lot of data. And even though we had more data than we've ever had from a tire manufacturer for this project, they don't give you everything. They don't give you every scenario. And so that's really where you kind of finally come back to. And when you're working with the drivers, you're actually, okay, the car's a little fast in this kind of corner. You're looking like their aim data or their other data that they've captured at different tracks. And as you test across the tracks in Assetto Corsa, you begin to decide, okay, we need to take a little bit of the tires in this way. Longitudinal grip's too high, lateral grip's too high, slip angle needs to be slightly tweaked. Various things like that, tire wear rates. I mean, that's one that you do near the end of the project, but making sure the tire wear is matching, because it can drastically differ based on camber rates, it can differ based on track temps, and also with the advanced physics, the heat transfers from the brakes into the tire. So getting the tire heating right, and then once again, you're kind of diving back in the brakes again. So it's certainly, the tires are the most complex part of the car. I really like tire development. It's like probably my favorite part of the process. I just nerd out in it. So even though it's probably the most complex, I've gotten pretty good at it. So it's not that much longer than maybe the suspension, but certainly for someone who maybe doesn't love tires, it could easily be by far the most time consuming part of the process.
So with this car, it doesn't have ABS,
Yes, correct.
but it does have quite an advanced TC system on it.
Yeah, and Assetto Corsa it's a combination of it relatively advanced, and in Assetto Corsa, it's very simple. It's just a slip-based kind of system that turns the throttle down until it regains slip. Boom, then your throttle's back on, and you can kind of have it going kind of like that almost if you're kind of on the borderline, which could be realistic for some systems, but is not realistic for the Revolution, because when the Revolution is driving, it's actually faster with the traction control system. And so with the Assetto Corsa version, we can show the inside here. With the Assetto Corsa version, you're actually going to have both control of gain and slip on the wheel. And so when you're doing this, when you're driving, you can do this while you're driving. You can actually change when the traction control system kicks in. You can also change the curve with the gain on how quickly it ramps up, how quickly it ramps down, and also the ultimate force that it kicks in with. So it's got that gain and slip curve, so you're able to really fine tune it. Similar, I mean, I wouldn't say it's necessarily as complex as like a Formula One car, but it is certainly similar to the highest levels of motorsport with like a hypercar or a Formula One car. In a lot of ways, it has a similar traction control.
I think it's really quite interesting that some real cars have god-awful TC. I think LMP3 is one that some people have mentioned actually has really bad TC systems on it, so the good drivers should turn it off. She's actually like default AC. Anyway, good TC systems on high-end cars and on modern cars, they are generally always used because pretty much always the driver will be faster with them, or they're going to wear the tyres less, and they just get used to that driving profile with those.
Exactly.
And bringing it back to this car in particular, I think it seems that the car's been designed to get that kind of intermediary profile for drivers to get that entry-level prototype is what they're going for, to then...
It's in a way, it's close to LMP3 performance, but they want it to have a forgiveness, a drivability that you get more with a GT car. And that's part of that is found through the traction control system. Part of that is just through the overall nature of the car as well. It's a relatively, for its category, it is a relatively affordable car per hour to drive. And so this is kind of the idea, is this is a car that you can take to track days, and if you can push, you can push. If you go over the limit, yeah, you got to catch yourself, but you're also not going to just stick it in the wall.
So that's another thing with simulators. Everything has infinite track time and cost. Like the engines, well, you just pick whatever. But with real cars, that engine, the amount of time you can get out of an engine becomes a really significant cost factor. So that's where you see the benefit, even though I think these are, so like 200K, but the real value of it is the runtime of it. And
and they do hold the value pretty well. And I mean, I'm not Revolution. They are our partners on this project, and Revolution has been fantastic. Like I said, they provided us with all the data, everything we needed. They've had the test group. Their CEO, Nigel, has worked with us and been an incredible help in terms of if we need something, he's going to make it happen.
Just interesting is why do you guys decide to use Assetto Corsa specifically? I think you guys like to work with AC. Why would you pick Assetto Corsa over other simulators?
Well, I mean, the biggest thing is kind of twofold. One, there's the extended physics, which gives you a lot of those systems already there, right? These additional professional kind of grade simulation physics modules or areas, right? But then also with Lua, like I mentioned, with the traction control system, we had to use Lua code to develop that for the car. And actually, why don't we come back over here? For example, this right here is the third element spring, right in here. And that is something that's not really natively supported by Assetto Corsa at all. And even extended physics doesn't really have a native solution for that. So what we did is, once again, this was the second system that we developed from scratch, and that was to add support for third element springs. And that now, so we have in the settings, you're gonna see, if you get the Assetto Corsa car, you're gonna see that there is both the stiffness and of course the gap. Because when you're driving normally this car, unless you set it to like a gap of 0, you're not going to be activating that. It's for when you're in mid-speed corners, you're exceeding 70 miles an hour. Of course, you can set the gap to be a bit higher, and you might not actually activate it until you're going over 100 miles an hour. But when the car starts to get that aero load, starts to compress, that's when it starts to come into play, and it just makes the car perform consistently, both at low speeds and high speeds, because you have an additional system that kicks in at those higher speeds.
Looking at the car here, guys, there's just so much detail here in the real car, because it's the real car. It's part of the, did you know that? When you build a real thing, there's a lot of detail there.
Yeah, exactly.
I just realised how stupid that's to say about a real thing. The point I was trying to get to is, in the model, the 3D modelling, the art side of the mod, bear with me, this is going to make sense. We'll get to the art side of the mod. Have you modelled all the internals?
So yeah, we haven't. So a lot of times we will model everything. The quality and detail of some of the components will be reduced for optimization purposes. So for example, if you're going to look at some of the details here around the transmission, some of the wiring, that's going to be quite low poly if you looked inside our model. But then there's other aspects, for example, when you go back to the dash area, you're going to see that that's something we're going to put a lot of time into. The poly count on that could be, you know, somewhere between, for almost everything that's in the field of view, which could be like the mirror, the dash and everything, can be up to like a quarter of the car's poly count. Steering wheel, that kind of thing, just because that's what you're staring at so much. So it's always a choice between including every detail and what level you detail it at, and what is actually the driver is going to be looking at. Another consideration is some people play in third-person view, so you always want to make sure that rear look of the car is correct and got good detail on it. So that's another thing that we focused on. And of course, everyone wants those nice exterior shots from the corners of the car, so you always focus on making sure that you get essentially the entire exterior well done, captured. One of the things too, right? What are we going to animate? Well, a lot of times what we decide to animate on the suspension is heavily related to what you can see at anywhere. What can we see here on the front? That we can see a decent amount of the suspension. So that part right there obviously is critical, kind of a critical component of the car that's visible, and it's going to be animated. So everything there essentially has to get that treatment within Assetto Corsa. We have to program it, make sure everything's animated and moving correctly. Of course, now at that point, we've already done it once. We might as well translate those same moving parts to the rear as well.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how we make the decision on what are we going to animate, what are we going to not.
So the steering wheel, this is custom for this vehicle. Like in the real, this is a specific Revolution make it for this car.
It's by a third party, I believe Life steering wheels. They've actually developed that steering wheel, and I believe Revolution, like with many of their parts suppliers, has a really good relationship with their manufacturers. And yeah, it is the wheel is the same across a couple of their vehicles at least. And yeah, it's a really cool, detailed piece. It kind of gives Formula One vibes a little bit, hypercar, LMP style.
And then, so for the modification, you've modelled that wheel, and then you've also had to do all the display.
Yep, exactly. So one of the things that's a good point. Yeah. So for the display, they actually sent over videos of the display in isolation, recorded on how it handles, and of course they have documentation on when are the shift points and things. And that was actually something we had slightly off. And we got a feedback on later in the process of, hey, you need to do this to change the screen to make sure it's exactly accurate, to make sure the lights are lighting up exactly the correct way when you're reaching the shift point. And we actually have a further update that will probably be coming, because there's still a few more tweaks we want to make to the screen. And there's also some sections beneath kind of the core components that show data just slightly differently in the layout. And so we're going to be changing that as well. And we're also looking at, well, potentially, because with the, you can have like the extra A button and you can switch through things. We're probably going to tie that. You might have a few options to rotate through a few different screens.
Is the art side taking longer than the physics side, or?
They're pretty comparable. And sometimes I will, so for example, we actually started doing some of the physics on our Rush SR that we had already done and completed, because it's kind of a base model. And you can, so for example, I started developing the engine before the 3D model was even done and even put into Assetto Corsa. But it took us about 3 months to both complete all of the 3D model aspects, fully texture everything, and bring it into Assetto Corsa. And then it took us another 2 months about for us to finish up the initial run of the physics and then kind of begin working with the test drivers. And then from there, it was it could have been completed in about another month or two, but because we started planning around this launch date, we ended up stretching it about 3 months of going back and forth with the drivers, fine-tuning those tires, and also making sure one of the big things is they really care about having the setup options reflect the real life to give their owner drivers, make them more comfortable with setup changes and learning just how to do that. How is it going to affect the car? In a simulator, we're right, it's a lot cheaper to experiment with those kind of things than at a track day where you're burning through the expensive tires. I think it's one of the biggest differences between what we do and what often happens when you work with other potential dev teams, or even like, I just throw shade a little bit at one of your favorite sims, iRacing. A lot of times when you look at those simulators, they get the data, they plug it in, and you get a car that's going to perform relatively similar. But unless you're continuing to go back and forth with the drivers, unless in a lot of the occasions I get a chance to drive the car, unless you begin to understand all the nuances and adjust everything, and sometimes too, you might have manufacturer data, but if they've made a change to some part of the car, for example, on the front of the car, adding the dive planes, well, they have some data they've provided, but it's been run before they added the dive planes. So then suddenly now, once you have the dive plane data, you kind of have to, okay, how does that handle? How does that affect things? How does it handle with the dive planes on or with them off? And so it's really just that final fine tuning going back and forth with the drivers. And that's what takes it from being within, I don't know, what most sims, 2-3 seconds of real time, a lap, across a large variety of tracks, to being with what we like to aim for is, if you're driving on one of our cars versus the real thing, you're certainly within a second and hopefully closer, half a second or even closer. I mean, and also too, one of the important things is too, it's track accuracy. So not all the mod tracks are going to be perfectly accurate. So sometimes we have to work with teams and we have to say, okay, what are the most critical tracks? What are the tracks you race at the most? Let's really dial it in here. Sometimes we unfortunately have to also tell people that, hey, this track, this particular one you want us to dial into, just can't work as a foundational resource because the accuracy of the track isn't high enough to then use it as a feedback point for how the mod should behave versus real life. Okay. And that can be a little bit unfortunate sometimes for test drivers to hear, but at the end of the day, you've got to have every part of the development process, including the tracks you're using with your test drivers, has to be accurate enough that you can produce a mod that's within those, not measured in seconds of accuracy, but measured in milliseconds of accuracy.
It's just crazy, the amount of things to put into a mod car. Like, there's just obviously the physics, then the specific tire adjustments, and then all the additional features that you get with, as I said, with shader patch, then additional stuff that can be programmed with Lua scripting. All the graphics, all the animations, custom dashes. So you're getting into like a flight simulator territory where they start basically each aeroplane ends up almost being its own simulator.
This car has more systems being simulated. It's all being simulated at 333 hertz per second, every single system. So you're getting a simulation that is at a prosumer, is kind of how I describe it, level. This is the type of car that Revolution's race car drivers are going to use to prepare for race weekends because it is a very good training tool.
I really appreciate having you talk me through the modding process and seeing these beautiful vehicles. Thanks for having me.
That's all very well and good, but what is it actually like to drive? And is the mod a good mod of the car? To find out, we headed over to iZone Driver Performance, where they had a nice modest budget rig for us to test the modification on.
I have to say, this is a really interesting car to drive. I initially thought that this would handle like a Radical SR3, because when you watch the cars going around the track and you just look at the sort of shape of the car and even the class that it races in, you think, oh, it's kind of going to be like a Radical. But actually, driving the mod car, it kind of handles like a weird, more prototyping, more like an LMP2 car, LMP3, LMP2, but then a little bit more reactive, a little bit more snappy. So I guess maybe they're aiming for it to be more like an LMP3 car, but maybe it's also lighter and smaller. But the result is that you have quite a progressive behaviour on the throttle, and it's, you know, it's quite a nice. It's not over the top. It's not crazy. You're not having to do crazy instant counter steer. You're not struggling with the rear. So a very, very progressive vehicle to drive, but at the same time it is still quite pointy, and from the steering input you do have the front of the car responding quite nicely. I don't know what the setup is that they're running on this with the mod and how it's set up at the simulation centre, but I'm also having to trail brake quite carefully into the corners. It seems to want you to brake quite early and then trail brake through the corner quite aggressively. But yeah, really interesting handling vehicle actually. I'm not really sure if there's anything that you can directly compare it to in AC. It very much has its own handling. An interesting car for people that maybe aren't particularly used to Formula or downforce cars and they want something to ease themselves into it. Really nice speed though, and I think I'm a little bit spoiled here on this triple screen setup. Whenever you use triple screen setups, especially with these, which are, I think, like 72-inch screens, 3 of them, that definitely adds to the sense of speed and immersion. But it'd be interesting to actually try this car in AC. I always find these types of sports prototypes in VR are absolutely fantastic. And that gets you the speed and the grounding of it as well. The cockpit in these vehicles is quite compact. But yeah, actually, I think as well, actually driving this though, I think this could produce some pretty good close online racing. As I say, it's not too much of a handful. I always find with these sports prototype vehicles, you really do get good racing out of them. You get a good amount of battling. Whereas I find with the Formula cars, you tend to end up with the people that can drive Formula cars rocketing away, and the people that are more road car orientated just languishing behind them. One thing that is catching me out on this, though, I don't know, it could be the setup of the rig, is the braking. I'm not braking hard enough, and I keep running really deep into the final corner at Silverstone. But let's try and just lift off here. See, the thing is, this car, like, it has a lot of downforce, and you can rely on the downforce through the faster corners at Silverstone, but it also does still slide around a little bit. It's not like magic downforce grip that you get from a lighter Formula car. Oh my goodness, I don't know what's going on there. Bottom shake from the motion rig. Yeah, so you do have a lot of downforce you have to lean on, but it still moves around, which I think is really quite fun. And then you saw there that though this car does have TC, I think it's on quite low at the moment, so you can ease yourself onto the throttle or welly it a bit. It depends on how strong you put the TC. Noticing as well, you get really good depth of the front end. If you go into corner too hot, the front washes out a little bit, but then it returns really quickly. So it's quite interesting. You're noticing some simulators, if you overdrive or if you go over the fronts, it just stays washed out and you have to wait a decade for the grip to come back. But with this, it has that really nice AC1 re-gripping of the tyre. So it just feels like there's a lot of depth to this mod. There's a lot going on. I'm sure some of that depth I'm experiencing is coming from this motion rig. Seatbelt tensioner, 6 points moving around, but there'll be a lot of it also inherent to the modification. At the end of the day, it's the physics of the simulator and the modification that actually drives all the motion rig stuff and equipment. But yeah, I could just sit on this car driving it relentlessly. First impressions of the Revolution 500 Evo. I say really interesting car, really interesting class of vehicle, sports prototype. Yeah, I want to drive more of this. I want to put it through the paces on my rig at home in my own setup. I do like using all this equipment, but you know, you can't really know what something's like unless you're using it on your own rig. But there you go, guys. Awesome.
So if you'd like to try it out for yourself, the download link is in the description, and hopefully we'll be able to do some racing with subscribers to truly put this car through its paces. Thanks to Revolution Race Cars and Authentic Sim Racing for having us at Silverstone. It's fascinating to see sim racing and racing simulators slowly consume all of motorsport like a digital zombie invasion. Until the next video though, guys, thank you very much for watching. Happy tea drinking, take care, and goodbye.